Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Ajay Solkhe, presently working as Assistant Professor, University School of Management, Kurukshetra University, Kurukshetra, Haryana. Upon completion of the module, the student should be able to understand the internal and external challenges of trade unions to gain an insight into the relevant organizational issues, certain measures to strengthen the trade unionism in India. Over the years, trade unions in India have been taken for a ride by outside political leaders. In the process, the interests of workers and their aspirations have been totally neglected. The Trade Union Act 1926 did not go for recognizing a representative union. As a result, multiple unions have cropped up, often with blessings from the management and outsiders. The union finances have not been very sound in the beginning. The average membership figures for each union remains poor and have not been improved. The forces of liberalization unleashed in the early 90s have strengthened the hands of employers in closing down unviable units. The new corporate mantras, productivity, performance, efficiency, survival of the fittest, have virtually pushed them to the wall, where their very survival looks quite uncertain. With regard to internal challenges of trade unions, we have 6 points. Very first is low membership density, financial strength of the trade unions, major sources and uses of funds, poor finances, representativity, declining union membership. With regard to the very first challenge, that is low membership density, the Trade Unions Act 1926 stipulates that all registered unions submit annual returns containing details of the membership, finances, etc. to the registrar of trade unions in the respective states where the unions are registered. The state governments in turn are supposed to compile and submit data to the Labour Bureau in Shimla. Non-submission of returns by a trade union can lead to cancellation of registration. Most trade unions, however, do not submit returns regularly because state governments are not usually known to cancel registration for non-submission, even though the Trade Union Act 1926 is empowered them to do so. Data published by the Indian Labour Bureau reveals that about half the states in the country do not furnish data for several years in succession. Union density is negligible in the informal sector in India, which employs 93% of the labour force. In the formal organized sector, unionization rates are fairly high in the public enterprises. In several central public sector undertakings, a substantial portion of the union members do not pay membership dues because they will anyway derive the benefits of collective agreements. The paradox in India is that membership of all the unions in some large enterprises like the Indian Railways is higher than the actual number employed in that industry. With regard to the internal challenge 2, that is declining union membership is declining in traditional industries as well as in industries which are themselves on the decline in certain regions. In the new non-traditional high-tech industries, unionization is becoming difficult, partly because of the small size of units in terms of employment and rather high employee turnover. Also, the workforce in such units is fairly diverse and includes women, minorities, and members from different ethnic groups. The absence of a critical mass, their footloose character in terms of stability, a general lack of lateral trust, and competitive individualized employment contracts make conditions for unionization extremely difficult. The best bet for trade unions is to explore the hitherto unexplored sectors, small and medium scale units in manufacturing and services, and the vast unorganized informal sector both in rural and urban areas. Though the unionization rate is low and even declining in some industries, trade unions in India have in some respects have wielded an influence disproportionate to the numbers they represent, largely due to political linkages. With respect to internal challenge 3, that is representativity, at present 5 national unions in India are recognized by the government as central trade union organization. The representativity of CTUOs at the national level is determined on the basis of the strength of the membership of the trade unions affiliated to central trade union organizations. The only source of data on union membership being the Union Labour Ministry, many state governments do not send information to the Government of India. There is no assessment of the current state and status of unions and their membership. Concerning the internal challenge 4, that is poor finances, the finances of trade unions are poor. There are not only problems in collecting subscription from members, the subscription itself is generally low. There is usually resistance if a union wants to increase the subscription. Also, unions are reluctant to raise subscription rates because that gives rival unions the opportunity to offer more without raising fees. One of the important sources of revenue for many unions is the contribution members make from the lump sum areas of pay they receive at the time of periodic wage revisions. With regard to internal challenge 5, that is major sources and uses of fund, the major sources of finances for trade unions include monthly or annual membership subscriptions, donations from members at the time of wage revision, interest on savings, contributions for political funds. The major uses of finances include expenditure on activities or services to members, wages and salaries of staff, travel expenses, printing, postage, stationery, legal expenditure on court fee, lawyer's fee, etc., meetings, conferences, campaigns, and similar other activities. Budgeting, financial control, and external audit of trade union finances are not common in many unions. They have problems mobilizing resources to step up activities to the desired extent. As a result, most trade unions are poorly staffed, and the staff, if any, are underpaid and provided with poor infrastructure and badly maintained and ill-equipped officers to carry out their tasks and responsibilities. Very few trade unions have a well-established infrastructure or substantial general funds. With respect to internal challenge 6, that is the financial strength of the trade unions, the following are some of the critical indicators of the factors that determine the financial strength of a trade union: composition of revenues, relative size of expenses and or revenues, amount of surplus or deficit over a period of time, number of activities carried out by unions' own funds. Small trade unions with declining membership find it hard to manage and sustain their existing activities, leave alone meet the emerging challenges. Financially sound unions often allocate a part of their funds for their office bearers to maintain a lavish lifestyle on a par with that of industrialists and senior managers. A decline in union membership and fall in revenue can start a vicious circle of cutback in a union's activities. Trade unions that are able to build up funds have a cushion to deal with unforeseen developments. External challenges. There are 5 external challenges. Very first of all, assertion of their rights by the community and consumers, managerial strategies and HRM policies, shifting attitudes of the government, rapid changes in technology, global competition. With regard to the external challenges influencing the trade unions movement, the very first is global competition. Global competitive challenges can be met through either or both of the following strategies: cost cutting and value addition. However, most companies they resort to cost cutting while very few opt for value addition. Neoliberal policies they are focusing more on profit than people. Cutthroat competition is resulting in massive workforce reductions. Cutting down numbers employed is a denominator management strategy whereby a company can become efficient but cannot grow. Companies now are trying to employ, say, a fourth of the workforce they used to have, pay them double the wage, and get 4 times the output. That is why trade unions often do not cooperate with management in productivity enhancing measures that make workers redundant. Most managements also find it difficult to deal with unionized workers and they try to replace the workers with machines. This strategy is not easily sustained because jobless growth unleashes a variety of social problems as well. Another external factor which is influencing trade and movement in India is rapid changes in technology. Rapid changes in technology and the resultant phenomenon of drastic decline in employment elasticities and workers' loss of control over jobs is a major challenge for trade unions. They find it hard to accept technological determination. The reality, however, is that the absence of state of the art technologies can affect not only the concerned sectors, for instance, IT enabled financial services, telecom, and transport, but the entire economy. Trade unions need to establish what they consider a desirable pattern and follow it. They also need to adapt themselves fast to the rapid changes, for if they are slow, they might cease to be relevant to their own members and to society. Technological obsolescence will lead to skill obsolescence, forcing workforce redundancies. Without continuous adoption of new tools, methods, products, etc., companies would find it difficult to survive. If the companies do not survive, the employees would lose their jobs and trade unions their membership. With regard to external factor, shifting attitudes of government, there is a marked shift in state policies worldwide from being labor friendly to investor friendly. When governments are union friendly, unions grow. When they are neutral, unions and unionism stagnate. When they adopt anti-union policies, unions and unionism decline. During Margaret Thatcher's term, union density declined to half its size. In the United States, union density usually increases by 1 or 2 percentage points when Democrats rule and declines by 1 or 2 percentage points when the Republicans are voted into power. Even when a Labour Party is ruling, in the face of neoliberal market economy, policies need to meet global competition. The governments have not been labour friendly or neutral. This was seen in Poland and Australia in the 1990s and is also in the UK and in the state of West Bengal in India. With respect to external factor, managerial strategies and HRM policies, when the state is neutral or anti-labor, union power is weakened. Also, workers are realizing that their jobs are secure only if their companies can withstand the market pressures. In the past, employees could keep their jobs even if the enterprise became sick because sick private enterprises were privatized and sick public ones were denationalized with some assurance against retrenchment and promises of maintenance of service condition. This is no longer so. In addition to these developments, modern technology has reduced labor intensity as also in many cases the critical mass for collective action, transforming a large number of blue collar jobs into fewer white collar ones and shifting controller over work from worker to management, even if it has made unskilled workers redundant and skilled workers prosperous with increased wages. With the changing age skill mix of people, managements have begun to adopt human resource practices that emphasize individualism rather than collectivism, direct participation of workers rather than indirect representations, decentralized rather than centralized collective bargaining. Together, these have weakened union power and enhanced managerial power. With respect to external factor, assertion of their rights by the community and consumers, unlike in the past, there is a growing trend among consumers to unite and fight for their rights with the support of the community through public interest litigation. When consumers in the community are adversely affected by the activities of employers or workers and their organization, the rights of the consumers and the community, invariably representative of great aggregation in terms of numbers, prevail. Recent judicial rulings by consumer courts, high courts and the Supreme Courts on issues such as the right to strike of government employees, environmental protection, ban on bandh, etc. confirm this kind of stance. Workers wear several hats in society: citizen, worker, trade union member, consumer, etc. For many workers, it is no longer the obvious thing to join a trade union. Increasingly, large proportion of the workforce are now guided more by pragmatism than ideology. Unions need to be more actively involved in public and industrial life. They should show greater concern and responsiveness to broader social problems. Here are certain problems and issues which influence the growth of trade unions in India. The prominent among them are: very first is leadership crisis, second is outside leadership, third is changing workforce demographics, fourth is internal democracy, then is illiteracy, then is uneven growth, heterogeneous nature of labor, lack of interest, absence of paid office bearers, multiple unions, and declining union power and influence. Let us examine them. Leadership crisis. In the past, charismatic union leaders from elite backgrounds centralized power and conducted union affairs paternalistically at best and as benevolent autocrats as worst. They knew what was good for their followers. In the recent past, however, there has been a significant change in the social composition of a trade union leadership at the enterprise level. Most often, union leaders now mirror the social composition of the workforce they represent. Ironically, the bridging of this gap between leaders and followers is paralleled by the increase in the gap in the understanding between the two. Also, unlike earlier, leaders now are forced to listen to their members. Union members are becoming skeptical about informal alliances between their leadership and management. In the past, what a union could or would do was influenced more by its leadership and staff than by its members. In future, unions will draw their sustenance from grassroots level and community goodwill. There is much debate about the need for and the role of outside leadership in trade unionism. Fundamentalistic managements have less tolerance for inside leadership. Problem of outside leadership. The nature of leadership significantly influences the union management relations, as the leadership is the linchpin of the management of trade unions. The leadership of most of the trade union in India has been outside leadership, mainly drawn from political parties. Changing workforce demographics. Blue collared workers use their physical and not their intellectual or creative energy. They are not usually encouraged to use their intellect. Communication is top down, motivation is through fear, and leadership is authoritarian of the command and control types. Their lack of marketable skills and alternative opportunities make blue collar workers vulnerable, and so they had a one sided independence on the employer under a system more characteristic of master and servant than a reciprocal employer employee relationship. The expectation of workers in such circumstances were also low, and they preferred to be treated as collectives rather than individuals. In contrast, today's knowledge workers are white collared with knowledge and skills and use more brain than brawn. They belong to the middle class rather than the working class. Their expectations are higher, needs are different. They prefer two-way transparent communications. They shun fear or favor and respond to fairness and expect leadership to lead by consensus and commitment. They have diverse aspirations. The young and the female workforce is less eager to join unions, not only in India but also in many other countries. Unions and employers, they need to reflect on why workers join or not join unions, as also on how to meet the higher and the different expectations of the new generation workforce. This is not a one-time exercise but has to be ongoing continuous process. Internal democracy. The lack of internal democracy has been one of the weaknesses of the trade union movement in India. In addition, the voice and stake of members is muted, additionally by linguistic and cultural differences. In certain countries, state intervention extends to various aspects of internal governance of unions. In the UK, particularly during the 80s and 80s, this led to a step-by-step approach to diminish the power and influence of trade unions in the country. Employers in India have been asking for similar measures. Problem of literacy. Workers in India, they fail to understand the implications of modern trade unionism. Their illiteracy coupled with ignorance and indifference account for the predominance of the outside leadership. Uneven growth. Trade unionism activities are more or less confined to major metros in India and are traceable only in large scale units. The degree of unionism also varies from industry to industry, varying between 30 to 70% in coal, cotton, textile, iron and steel, tobacco, and similar other industries. The degree of unionism is quite negligible in the agriculture and unorganized sectors. They find it difficult to engage the services of experts to aid and advise members in terms of need. They can't bargain with the employer directly on their own. Heterogeneous nature of labor. Since workers came to the factory with varying backgrounds, it is difficult for them to preset a joint front in case of trouble. Employers exploit the situation under the circumstances by dividing workers on the basis of caste, color, creed, religion, language, etc. Lack of interest. For a large majority of workers, unionism even today remains a foreign issue. In fact, workers avoid union activities out of sheer disinterestedness. Those who become part of the union do not also participate in the union work enthusiastically. In such a scenario, it is not surprising to find outside political leaders exploiting the situation to serve their own personal agenda. Problem 9. Absence of paid office bearers. Weak finances do not permit unions to engage the services of full-time paid office bearers. Union activists who work on a part-time basis neither have the time nor the energy to take up union activities sincerely and diligently. Multiple unions. Multiple unionism, both at the plant and the industry level, pose a serious threat to industrial peace and harmony in India. The situation of multiple unions is said to prevail when two or more unions in the same plant or industry try to assert rival claims over each other and function with overlapping jurisdiction. The multiple unions exist due to the existence of crafts union and formation of two or more unions in the industry. Multiple unionism is not a phenomenon unique to India. It exists even in advanced countries like UK and USA. Multiple unionism affects the industrial relations system both positively and negatively. It is sometimes desirable for the democratic health of labor movement. It encourages a healthy competition and acts as a check to the adoption of undemocratic practice, authoritative structure and autocratic leadership. However, the negative impacts of multiple unions dominate the positive impacts. The nature of competition tends to convert itself into a sense of unfair competition, resulting in inter-union rivalry. The rivalry destroys the feeling of mutual trust and cooperation among the leadership. It is a major cause for weakening the trade union movement in India. Multiple unionism also results in the small size of the unions, poor finances, etc. Declining union power and influence. Union power and influence in India started declining in the late 1970s, and this decline became sharper during the 90s and after. The major reasons were the decreasing relevance of unions to their own members due to their inability or reluctance to change and adapt to the changes in the world of work, workplaces, workforce, and society. Inability of workers to organize themselves, leader-centric rather than mass-based nature of most unions. Excessive emphasis on wage welfare functions to the next of wider social issues and consequent ability to develop broad-based class organization with long-term goals. Relatively small size of the majority of enterprises. Fragmentation in terms of class, category, caste, region, ideology. Lack of internal democracy in unions and consequent non-involvement of the rank and the file in union activity. Excessive dependence of unions for the survival and functioning on either or both of the state and employer. Tilt in balance of power due to technology and shift from a planned to a neoliberal market economy. Negative public image of unions. The impact of the foregoing is apparent from the declining bargaining power of unions and loss of job, income and social security, as well as accumulated rights and privileges. What are the strategies for strengthening unions and unionism in India? The following elements should form part of the strategy to strengthen unions and unionism. Organize, organize and organize. Membership drive is the most critical one. Expand membership base. Should unions be only of workers or should they encompass the unemployed and the retired? There is certainly a case for making unions attractive to young, new workers and women. Unity within the trade union movement. If structural unity is difficult and takes time to establish, issue-based and functional unity is imperative. Fractured unions do good for neither workers nor companies. Realize the importance of the nexus between the performance of the enterprise and the well-being of its workers, and the commonality between making enterprises competitive and improving the quality of life of their members. Country first, company second, and self third is an approach that at least one of the national trade union centers in India has adopted as its focus. Reinvent the role. The goals of the union may be eternal, but the means of action should be adapted to changing times. The way to attract and galvanize blue collar workers into action has to be different from that of white collar knowledge workers. In this era of intense competition, unions should consider cooperating with managements in baking the cake and compete with the management in sharing it. Form broad coalitions and networks with civil society institutions to develop broad based and long term strategies for the welfare of the workers and the wider society. Friends, I hope you have understood the contents well. You can also refer to other quadrants of this module for testing your knowledge and having some more input on theme of the module. Happy learning.